Welcome everyone to the very first dialogue with the daughters. You can now meet us in person. Right now, the attendees, I believe you're only seeing me, but I'll allow you to see the rest of the panelists shortly. So today we're going to have a chance for you to ask whatever you want to ask the daughters. You've heard me talking to them for months on the podcast, and that's enough. That's enough of you hearing me. And instead, this is your chance to ask them the questions that you want to ask. We've already received some of your questions in advance, and I will be starting with those. And this won't be like a typical webinar. So again, you've heard me for so many hours talking on the podcast. This isn't for me to come up with the questions. These are your questions. This is your time. And we're going to assume that you've all listened to the podcast episodes and you're familiar with the stories. So again, we aren't going to be repeating the stories. And remember, this is a non-political discussion that may be difficult considering the climate right now, but this is a non-political discussion. We're going to focus on each daughter's narrative. And today, the common thread between the 5 women that you will talk to today is that in their ancestry, they had white men supporting and passing on wealth to their enslaved Black women or women of color and their children with them. And we have some women here who have prominent, wealthy, free women of color in their ancestry. And remember, this discussion is not limited to just that common thread that they have in common. You're free to ask them any questions, fun questions about family backgrounds, lineage, motherhood, their careers, or even the genealogy research. So this is an open conversation to whatever strikes you that you want to know about these fascinating and wonderful women. So I will start by introducing the daughters. I want to make sure that you're able to see. Just a second. There they are. Welcome the daughters. They can see you now, ladies. So welcome everyone. So now I'll start by introducing Shelley Murphy. Shelley Murphy, her title of the podcast was From Survivor to Jefferson's Enslaved Laborers Researcher. Shelley tells us in her podcast about her journey from surviving as a high school dropout, victim of domestic abuse, and a young single mother to earning her doctorate and becoming a University of Virginia researcher, investigating President Thomas Jefferson's beloved university and the enslaved laborers who built it. She talks about her Black ancestor who owned slaves, James Roper, the son of a slave, and Nicholas Roper, who left everything to his mulatto son, including slaves. And half of James's kids decided to pass for white. And she talked about their descendants' reaction when they learned of their Black ancestry. Next, we have Michelle Campbell. Her title was Telecom Trailblazer, Protecting the World. Her ancestor, and the title also included John Hart's City and Countryside Dual Family. Michelle provided us a blueprint for how women can advance to the executive level in corporate America and survive the college engineering program by sharing the story of her rise to leadership in the telecommunications industry, which has included addressing the United Nations on communications solutions during global catastrophes. Michelle shares the story of her ancestors' acknowledged dual family arrangement in Macon, Georgia, in which the prominent John Hart, grandson of Revolutionary War patriot Robert Hart, provided for her Black ancestor, Hetty Valentine, and their children on his land in the countryside, while also maintaining a white family in the city. We welcome Holly Henderson. Autism Advocate, Ancestors Genetic Morse Code was the title of her podcast episode. Holly discusses raising 3 uniquely special children on the autism spectrum, each with accompanying health challenges. After working as a flight attendant and then leaving her position as a gubernatorial appointee, working as the Deputy Director of Communications for BWI Airport, and subsequently being selected to be the Director of Communications for the Maryland Transit Administration. And she talked about solving the mystery of who is the father of her family patriarch, Preston Riley, descendant of Revolutionary War patriot Jacob Riley, and learning that Preston's father was T.J. Riley, a white man who had a relationship with a slave woman named Sally. And he petitioned the court to take care of their sons and left land to her. Next, we have Bianca Alexander. Bianca Alexander, global educator, principal, and Creole colorism was her episode. And classism, let's not forget that. Bianca talks about leading schools in the Middle East and her Creole culture in which her cousins intermarried to remain fair complexioned and preserve their culture. Her grandmother deciding to passe blanc, which is pass for white, and being adamant about not being African, and being shunned by her family because she had less European features than her siblings and associated with Blacks. And her family's Creole social status and wealth attained in the Cane River, Louisiana community by former slave Marie Therese Coincoin, who she owned slaves and land, resulting from a placage relationship with Frenchman Claude Thomas Pierre Matoyer. And Joyce Mosley, her title was Single Parent Adoption Pioneer, Early Philadelphia Prominence. Joyce was the first to adopt as a single parent in Philadelphia. She compiled a cohesive record of her complex family history tracing back to the 1600s and joined the Daughters of the American Revolution despite passing the grave of Marian Anderson when she visited family members who played with Marian and were also buried in the same cemetery. She talks about her ancestor, Humphrey Moray, the first mayor of Philadelphia, and his son, Richard, who owned and freed his wife, Cremona, who was one of the richest women in Pennsylvania. Welcome, welcome, ladies. So again, before we get started with the questions that were pre-submitted before during the registration process, I'll go over the webinar controls once again. Use the chat to go ahead and freely chat amongst yourselves. If you have a question for the panelists that you would like to get answered, please use the question and answer function. And if there's a lot of questions that come in, you'll see a thumbs up beside one of the questions, which means you will like the question. It will upvote it, meaning the more likes that question has, the higher it will come on the list and I'll see it first. So if you like someone else's question, you really want it answered, put a thumbs up to it in the Q&A. And if you have some thoughts that you forgot to put in about it, you can also comment on your own question in that Q&A box. So we shall begin, ladies. Some of the questions that were submitted in advance. We have, I'm looking forward to, this is a question, I'm looking forward to hearing the types of documents the ladies found to validate the Black daughter's lineage and property gifts. So remember the theme between the ladies is that there was a relationship with a white man and an enslaved or a woman of color, and they had children together, and he passed his property and or wealth down to them. So this attendee is asking, what type of documents did you find to validate that lineage and that they did receive gifts? Since we have so many questions and so many ladies, try to limit it to like a 60-second answer if you can. Okay. All right. So I'm just gonna start at the bottom. Michelle, not literally the bottom, but you're on the bottom of my squares. You're always on the top, Michelle.
That's right. So the documentation that I was able to find relative to the land grant was a lottery that was provided to the Revolutionary War patriots. So at the end of the war, they were given so many acres of land, and I was able to actually find that documentation, and I'm actually looking at it right now. It was in 1827 when they got it. And to this day, it's still in the family.
Thank you. And Bianca.
I can tell you that down in Natchitoches Parish, you can go to the old courthouse and you can take a look at some of the records that they have for various people that lived in that parish. And so I know that there's also conveyances of the land that they owned. You can also get that information from birth certificates and plantation documents, bill of sales for slaves, and any livestock that they had.
Joyce.
Richard Moray actually wrote a deed for the land that he passed on. He gave Cremona 198 acres of land, which was part of the land that his father had bought from William Penn. They also wrote the deed to that land on a sheepskin, and that sheepskin is now part of a museum piece.
Holly.
Well, I had a team of about 7 people assisting me on my journey, so I have to thank them for finding a lot of the documents. But it ranged anywhere from, I wrote it down, we had family letters, we had oral history that was written down and passed through the family reunions that we would have and the family programs, so that information would just go forward. We also, just using the U.S. Census, we used slave schedules, cemetery records, deeds. We had actual court documents of the land being passed on, and a lot of information was found through some library books in the Macon Library.
Shelley Murphy.
Mine was actually an emancipation document and to a deed. So the enslaver father had basically emancipated his only child, a son called James Roper, 1795. And then what was very interesting, so finding that document and then the deed, was to also find out that he gave him a 99-year lease on all of his holdings. So he freed him at 11 years old, but he also received a 99-year lease because, of course, a slave could not own property. And that was up in Jefferson County, Virginia at the time.
Thank you. How important is the unique or incredible aspects of your story to the current discourse on race and reconciliation in our nation? That is a question submitted in advance by an attendee. So we'll start with Shelley.
Well, I think example of I think we make up what America is. And so anything that you look back to, I think we can connect it to something today. And as far as if it's race relations, all of us have mixed ancestry. So I think slavery is a component of all of that. So I everything just seems to be relevant to me as I identify myself as an American with African American ancestry.
Holly.
Me next, all right.
Yeah.
She's going the reverse now.
I know. So good to me. Well, everyone's story is unique because it's our story. And so that's what makes it unique. And wow, I would just say that it's been an honor to be able to have the assistance and to have the time to be able to go and look for information, find the information. And it gave me a sense of purpose. Gave me a sense of belonging. I think it gave a deeper sense of patriotism to this country. My people fought too. I have a right to be here too. So I'm thankful that the information has unveiled itself. I wish and hope that more information on other family lines starts to unveil itself, and that we can continue to find those elusive ancestors and connect with current modern day relatives. I have hundreds of thousands, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but I have like probably tens of thousands of DNA matches from all the various testing sites that I've done, and cannot find the common ancestor and may never find the common ancestor, but we know that we have something in common. So, whether they're white or black or biracial or what have you, we belong to each other. We belong to this country.
Joyce.
So our history is American history. So even if they write us out of history, the fact that we all have these unique, different stories adds to the flair and the color of American history. So I can go back at least to the 1600s, but then just recently, in some of the research I'm doing, I actually can go back to the Pilgrims. So that's something I'm leaving to future generations in my family, and I think that's important.
Bianca?
You know, I remember being trained to become a teacher, a French teacher early on. And one of the things that they told us is that America is a patchwork quilt. So you've got all these squares that are sewn together, but now we're becoming a melting pot. And so, yes, Black American history, how we all identify, is American history, and it can't be erased. I know that it's been a sore spot for many people to even discuss that they owned slaves, but you know, slavery was a part of the American economy. Cotton was king, right? Because it fueled the economy. Not only did it produce a product for clothing that was shipped overseas, but it was done with the hands of people of color. So this history, what we're doing right now, is monumental. It is an honor, like Holly said, but our history is American history. Ditto, Joyce.
Michelle Campbell.
So I look at this as an opportunity for us to write history, to get it right. There's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of stereotypes and a lot of falsehoods that incorporate the current American history books. So I look at my story as well as everyone else's story on this call and within the organization itself as an opportunity for us to write the story, for us to tell it from our perspective, what African Americans have done, what we've contributed, how we are relevant, how our lives matter. You know, people don't have a perspective of why we say Black Lives Matter. If you look at our history, and then you can go back to present day, you'll say, okay, I get it. I understand why our lives matter. And so I think it's incredibly important that all African Americans understand their heritage, where they came from, how they contributed to this country, and understand their relevance and why we say Black Lives Matter.
Thank you. Has there been, so this is again submitted from an attendee in advance, has there been any familial trepidation from either side of your relations concerning the relationship dynamic of your early ancestors? If so, how has it impacted your personal family history sojourn? So has there been any kind of, I don't know, discussion about the relationships between your early ancestors, and has your family had some hesitation about it, or some type of, you know, did something happen as a result of learning your history? And what happened? What has happened during your family's journey along learning about your family history? What has happened in the past because of the relationship dynamic between your ancestors regarding either side of your family? So we'll start with Joyce.
Well, a number of my relatives went on the other side and passed for white. So they were kind of lost to the family. And but their children or their grandchildren are on Ancestry.com or one of the other sites looking for their family. So I've actually been in touch with cousins I didn't know I had, and they were surprised to find out that they had African and Native American roots. Although when they thought about it, there were things like they got suntanned in the summer and their hair was a little different, so they kind of figured that out. But it was interesting to me that they, in most cases, were very happy to adopt the family history because it was a family that made a lot of contributions to American history. And Paul Robeson's one. When I tell them that Paul Robeson is in the family, then they're very happy to be in the family. Or the when Philadelphia Museum has the only known wedding portraits of an African-American couple, which are Hiram and Elizabeth Montier, which are cousins. And so they're willing to accept the fact, the good part of the family, the historic part of the family, not that there's a bad part, but the part that enriches their own family history.
Thank you. Michelle?
Well, I can't say that there's been any adversity or any hesitation. To be honest with you, actually on both sides of my family, I have Revolutionary War patriots. So they've been very open. And it was interesting because I talked to some of the elders in the family who happen to be white, and they've embraced us. I'll be honest with you, they really embraced us. And one of our relatives, his name is Robert Campbell, he uses the phrase 50 shades of brown. And that's what he calls us, because we're from, the whitest of whites to the darkest of darks and everything in between. And he's just so excited. So really, I think where I thought there might be some reservation about them acknowledging and having proof that there are African Americans in their family, it was exactly the opposite. They were very, very welcoming and very helpful, in fact, to help me with my own research to back out, to England and to Scotland. And so if it wasn't for them, actually, I wouldn't have been able to do that trace. So I really don't have a bad news story. I'm sorry.
But this is the answer, and that you've had these joint family reunions together with
Yes,
the
we
black and the
did.
white side of the families.
We did. And let me
Right.
speak on that real quick for 10 seconds. In Macon, Georgia, the first kind of, I would say, multicultural family reunion took place. And it was amazing because we had about 200 people that attended, and Black and white. We did research and historical presentation of present day all the way back to England. And it was very fascinating that our white relative was able to give us a full on history of our English heritage, which no one knew. I come from Detroit, Michigan, so we didn't know that we were connected to a king of England, but we have documentation to prove as such.
Bianca?
I wish I could say I have a story like Michelle's, but due to having many cousins who pass, not feeling comfortable identifying as Black, even some members who are of Creole ancestry, when they share with some other cousins who did not know how much African blood was in their DNA, shy away from even becoming members. So there's a stigma with being Black, having color. And I know it stems from slavery. It stems from not being valued as a human being. So it's been a tear in a lot of the Creole families. What your hair looks like, how light are you? You may have better opportunities if you have children with someone that has certain features. That has really broken up some of the branches in my immediate family, from my father's generation to my grandmother's generation, and my great-grandparents' generation. So I wish I could connect with some of those who may be Black, who identify as white, and even some of those who are Caucasian, just to say, hey, we're all the same. Yes, it has not been a huge plus for me. And I'll tell you, I went down to spend time in Louisiana with my chapter regent, who is white. I met her for the first time this past Thanksgiving. And I didn't stay with any family because I was too afraid to go down there. And I didn't think I would be accepted by the Creoles, the Blacks, or those who are Black that pass for white. So I stayed with my chapter regent.
And chapter regent meaning the leader of your DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution chapter.
Yes, she's on the line, Peggy Acott.
Hi, Peggy. Thank you for being so honest, Bianca. Holly?
When I was accepted into the DAR and inducted into the DAR, decided to collect all of my research and put it into writing for posterity. And so I wrote Riley Road. And in doing so, I interviewed many family members, the matriarchs of the family, and their memories and different documentation that they had that I included in the book. And I have a picture of Preston Riley, who is my second great grandfather, who was the son of the judge, the white judge in Butler, Taylor County, Georgia. And in talking to one of the cousins, he is adamant that Preston Riley was not biracial. He's like, he is a white man. He's a white man. And so he must have gone on and on for several minutes. And I just let him talk because that's his experience. That's, his understanding of it. And that's, we each have our own understanding and we have our own thoughts. And that's valid and valuable. So it was interesting just getting different perspectives from around the family and their experiences, having most of them still live, pretty much all of them still live there in somewhere in Georgia, either in Macon or Augusta or Atlanta or still in Butler. And the family Riley cemetery is divided into two sides. The white Rileys are buried on one side and the black Rileys are buried on the other side. And one of the letters that I included in the book from my Aunt Edna, who was my great grandmother's sister, my great aunt, it was a letter from one of the white Riley men. The family mystery was who was the father of Preston Riley. They knew he was the judge, but they never knew his first name. And so one of the descendants of the judge on the white side, my great aunt had written to him trying to get some information because they were going to have this first family reunion back in the 70s. And so he kind of danced around in the letter, the information. I have great fond memories of you and, the brothers and da, 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 da. And so, that's part of the family history, that we can include this letter and his memories of both the white and the black Rileys. And actually the letter helped to verify some of the information that I was looking at in terms of the two branches and how they came together. So in the end, it proved to be a confirmation, even though he was trying to dance around it, it proved to be a confirmation. But from my understanding from my family members that still live in the area, they still have good relations with both sides. They both kind of somewhat openly acknowledge one another. They're not necessarily, there's no hesitation really in acknowledging one another. It's kind of like an unspoken recognition, if you will.
Thank you. Shelley?
Yeah, I've had both experiences. The first, I'll be positive and say the folks that I encountered were actually genealogists and were researching just like I was. So they were just as enthused about finding the connection and helping, each of us, because they didn't really know about us and I didn't know really about them. And so about 20 some years ago, connected with someone and met them probably 5-6 years ago at Roots Tech out in Salt Lake City. And so that was a sharing of information. And then on another side, again, two researchers doing their family, and they're the white researchers doing the white side. I'm coming in, bringing the mixed side, and so that was all good. But then there was one that actually they're white and they're up in Ohio, and they contacted me, said, hey, da 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 da, not DNA. This was research, public tree, the whole 9 yard on ancestry. And so when I started sharing information that I had, she says, oh, I think we have the wrong family, because my grandfather is Columbus Brant, because they kind of changed it, and these are the kids. And I said, I have the same kids, and Columbus's daddy is James, and James is my second great grandmother's brother. Well, probably it's been 10 years. I still ain't heard back from her. She just totally cut. She said, that is not true. That, it went dead totally. So, DNA is going to bring us back together, because his name has came back up probably this year. Well, in 2020 has came back up. So one of those children of that lady are going to be contacting me, I'm sure, or something has came up, but they are definitely, I can say mulatto, whatever you want to dress that up as, but she cut it off right at the door. Just like, nope, that was it. And I thought, okay, I'm fine.
Thank you, Shelley. So
Yeah.
we have, before we go into the last pre-submitted questions, I want to just poll the audience really quickly. I have launched a poll and I'm asking, are you a member of the DAR? Yes or no? Basically, we just want to know, get a little information about who's joining us today in the context of this conversation. And 70% of you have voted, so I'll give you a chance, a few more. Just click the answer on your screen, yes or no. And so far we have 68 people joining us right now. All right, almost done. 80% have voted. I'm going to end the polling soon in a few seconds. Make sure you get your answer in. Ending polling now. And there we go. It's almost a split. Sharing results. Let's see. Here we go. It's almost an equal split.
Yes.
52% yes.
Very interesting.
Yes. No is 48%.
Nice.
Okay. And then I have a second question for you. Just basically, how do you know the people that are on this panel? I'm launching the poll. How are you affiliated with the Dialogue with the Daughters? Basically, you can pick as many answers that apply to you. You don't have to pick just one. Do you personally know a panelist? Are you just familiar with the panelist through like a genealogy group? You're a DAR member of color. This is redundant. Are you a DAR member? Just go ahead and answer it again. Are you working on joining the DAR, or you don't know any of these ladies? You just like listening to the podcast. So let's see.
Well, that's good too.
That I love that. We want more people to know about these important histories that we're sharing and the context of the narratives that you're sharing. So we have 82% have voted. I'm gonna stop the voting and shortly get your answers in. All right, I'm going to, oh, one more snuck their answer in. I didn't want to cut anybody off. All right, click your answer. I'm stopping the polling now. And here we go.
Wow.
You know, folks on the panel. And so that's cool. We've got a nice mix. Thank you. Thank you for doing that. All right. So this next question is going to be about one woman. She knows who she is, submitted a bunch of questions per person. And so I'm going to ask that you do a rapid fire answer. So I have like 5 questions per person, but I want it to be like a 2-3 word answer so we can get through them. Okay. So we got that. All right, Holly, we're going to start with you. Let me turn my page. Uh-oh. All right, here we go, Holly. You ready? Rapid fire, okay? How can you use your passion for advocacy for children with autism to support the DAR education mission? Have you ever submitted a lesson plan to the community classroom database on the NSDAR, meaning National Society website?
All right, really quickly. So the DAR mission is threefold. It's historic preservation, education, and patriotism, which even before I joined the DAR, I was trying to do all those things anyway. So I incorporate all those in my homeschooling curriculum. And no, I have not submitted anything to the community classroom, but I have looked at it and I plan to. Hopefully.
Okay, perfect. You are blessed with 3 special children. How are you advocating for their future? Any thoughts for those of us in similar situations with children on the autism spectrum? Go.
Well, if you've met one kid with autism, you've met one kid with autism is what they say. But I would encourage you to go with what's in your gut with the research that you've had and do what you can do and seek resources that are out there. And you are the advocate for your child. No one else is going to advocate better for your child than you as the parent or grandparent.
Okay, next. You are homeschooling. Will you continue to homeschool through high school? What additional services or resources do you use?
I take it day by day, probably. I use Seton Home Study. They're based out of Front Royal, Virginia. I use Khan Academy, abcmouse.com, Adapted Mind, whatever's I can find on the internet, old books, new books. It's a combination.
Next, what did you like the most about Munich, Germany?
Going to the salt mines.
Okay, where do you see yourself when your children are grown?
Resting on the beach.
You would deserve it. How on earth do you find time for baking, reading, and swimming?
I don't know. In the middle of the night, usually.
You're swimming in the middle of the night? Okay.
Yeah.
If you could travel to only 3 more places, because you used to be a flight attendant, if you could travel to only 3 more places, what would they be? Go.
The Holy Land, Egypt, and the South Pacific.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Next on my list is Joyce. Your family history is fascinating. Have any of the teachers, this is a teacher, whoever submitted this loves teaching. Have any of the teachers in your DAR chapter considered creating and sharing lesson plans based on your ancestors or on your book, Graham's Gift, which said lesson plans could be submitted to the Community Classroom Committee lesson plan database? Okay.
This question, after reading this question, I actually looked up the lesson plan. So if there's any teachers out there that would like to work with me to set up a lesson plan, I would be willing to do that. Very happy to do that.
Perfect. What do you think Marian Anderson would think of today's DAR?
I think she would evaluate the DAR based on conditions of today.
That's it. Okay, I'll let you all
said quick.
with that one. Thank you. All right.
I got it. I got it.
All right. Shelley Murphy, next. Shelley, are you planning
Yes.
on publishing a book detailing your research on the University of Virginia?
No. Next question.
Have you considered teaching an online master's course on master's in quotation marks course on genealogical research?
I am actually writing a course and I'm going to find a school to take it. Yes.
Perfect. What kind of books?
Undergrad though.
Okay. What kind of books do you collect?
History, African American, anything, Pilgrims, Revolutionary War, anything to do with people, humans, their stories.
Okay.
And I've got 4 bookcases and I'm sitting in my bedroom right now, right around here.
Okay. Have you actively recruited other African American women outside of your family for membership in DAR?
Oh my gosh, yes. 7 days a week. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
My mission right there. Find other daughters or to potential daughters and help them with the research. Absolutely. The goal is they told us no, and we say yes.
Thank you. Bianca.
Yes.
All right. Is the Creole culture still thriving today?
Oh, absolutely. I know many people think it's just New Orleans, but Natchitoches Parish is that other part of central Louisiana where we are still thriving. I had a cousin who wanted to hook me up with a cousin so we could keep it all in the family. Yeah. But yeah, we are thriving. The culture, the food, growing up Roman Catholic is still very much so rooted in the community. So yes.
Okay, so you said a cousin wanted to hook you up, meaning get together to have children
with a cousin,
with
just
cousin to keep
marry
Creole.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Even today.
Mm-hmm.
Just this week.
Just this week, one of my cousins, I won't name the last names because we've married into the same families, but yeah, I think he's 3 times removed.
Okay. What are your thoughts on the race checkbox we see on many forums? How many do you check? Or how do you check them rather?
You know, now that I'm on the other side, I'm on the management side instead of being the teacher on the teacher side. I know that there have been people who look at candidates' names, and we do that piece where we just kind of survey. We want to know that we're meeting the guidelines to open up opportunities to everyone. And so I know some people mark other because they don't want to be not picked for a position because they're Black or another person of color. Some will even mark Hispanic, but they don't necessarily identify as Hispanic.
But how do you check it is the question.
Well, and so that because there's a lot of mix in there for me. I do other now. because I think that I probably missed out on some jobs from
Okay.
Marty Black.
You have a master's in education with a specific emphasis on children with special needs. What are your thoughts about mainstreaming? It's got to be quick.
My masters are in instructional technology and design and school law. The school law led me to work on going into IEP meetings and multidisciplinary hearings for students who had special needs who were not receiving due process. It's very important that I use my education to be able to help students, the underdogs, those that don't have advocates.
Okay. You were a principal or are a principal in an Indian American school in New Mexico. What are the differences, if any, in the outlooks, attitudes, challenges of those students and those of the students you worked with in Ohio?
There is no difference. I work at a free and reduced lunch school. So, almost all of my students are poor. Some don't have running water. These are Navajo Nation children. No running water, no electricity. And it's actually the Eastern Navajo region. So that's Utah, New Mexico, and Arizona. There's no difference. The only difference is that they're a lighter shade of brown.
Okay. The struggle for providing quality education for children is real. Any insights or answers? It's got to be quick.
This is a long answer.
Can't be.
Right. So I don't have an answer for that.
Okay.
I don't have an answer for that.
Do you miss snow? You used to be in Ohio, now you're out in New Mexico.
No, but I do love all the seasons. You can get snow up in northern New Mexico.
Yeah.
Perfect. Michelle, time for your rapid fire. You provided a blueprint for the advancement of women in corporate America. How can that blueprint be shared with a larger audience? Is it scalable?
So I'm excited to announce that I will be launching a career coaching program from entry level to executive level. I've been all of those levels. So I think that this is a great time, especially for people of color, to understand how the corporate card game is played. It's not about who you know, and it's about who knows you and what are they saying about you. So it's a
Awesome.
whole different paradigm.
All right. Did the NYPD chief of police implement any of the ideas you discussed in your post 9/11 meeting?
That was an excellent meeting. It was a 10-year anniversary of 9/11. Yes, they did. In 2012, the government launched a program called FirstNet, which is a nationwide public safety network. They have joined that network and are now in deployment of utilizing that network for first responders.
Are you still in contact with the Hart family members who attended your lineage presentation?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What interests your sons the most about CAR, Children of the American Revolution?
Yeah, so admittedly, I put them in it when they were really young, so they didn't know much about it. But the whole goal of that was to, again, write our history, tell our history at all levels, at all different generations, just understand African-American history and our relevance in America.
Okay, perfect. We're going to go to some of the questions posted here in this chat, and we have 2 left from pre-submitted questions. So now I'm looking at the ones in the Q&A. The top that has been upvoted, 4 likes to it. How can we as daughters help document the entirety of American history, the good, the bad, the truths, to ensure the full story is represented for all peoples, gender, race, religion, etc.? All right, I'll start with Holly.
Well, I think this is a good start. Documenting whether it's audio, whether it's a podcast, whether you're writing a book, a blog, whether you're having conversations with people, it's getting the information out there. But the written document, the written word that can last and that can be shared, especially through this digital age, I think is very important. Even just taking a video and interviewing your matriarchs, patriarchs of the family while they're still here, while they're still with us. I mean, if I could go back 20 years and interview my grandmother, or 30 years and interview my great grandmother, I'd be so much further along. So just making the effort, and everyone has a piece to the puzzle. And so if we can each make the effort and do our part, and that's how the truth the truth will set us free. That's how it gets out there.
And Shelley, can you add to that? How can people who aren't doing their own research, or maybe other daughters, meaning non-daughters of color, maybe daughters of the American Revolution or other people outside of the DAR, how can they help with telling the truth about American history? So not just us personally.
Well, first thing is don't be afraid. I'm not asking for any of my right relatives for anything. I'm not asking for them to give me reparations or anything. I am asking them to share information about our family. And also the fact is, I want to make sure I'm telling my family story, because who gets to tell is who is telling the truth and factual, and it needs to come from our perspective. So that's how they can help, is by sharing and not being afraid.
Does any other panelists want to add anything to that?
I think one of the most important things is to pass it on to the next generation.
Oh,
We've done all of the research, we've documented, and we need to find somebody who's going to keep going. But also we need to make sure that the children in our family know their history.
Yeah.
You know, we can't rely on the schools to educate them. I wrote a book called Grant's Gift, and it really is to tell the children in my family what their history is like. And the response to that has been very interesting, because the kids have said to me, you know, I never knew this. Some of the teenagers have said to me, you know, I don't learn this in school. So it was the only way they found out what the contributions our family made to American history.
Yeah.
And I was just going to add real quick, maybe we could collaborate with the African American Sons of the American Revolution and find out their story. You know, I know that you do some work, Risha, with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is a Sons. I think we should, maybe they have an organization like, you know, like a subgroup like we're doing here within the DAR. I'd love to hear their story.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. So the next question is, this is from the Q&A. She asks, I live in an extremely racist city. One of our pioneers was a freed slave from Virginia who settled here in 1828, whose father was his owner, and he had to go back to Virginia to buy his mother for $500 in 1830. When he died in 1879, he was the fourth largest landowner and had $75,000 in cash. The city put a parking lot over the cemetery that his pioneer had on his land. They did not acknowledge his history until they dug up a few bodies this summer. My question is, do you have suggestions on how I can get this story out to honor this man's life, since our city doesn't want to honor him? He was involved with the Underground Railroad, started the Second Baptist Church, and a master blacksmith. He deserves to be honored. I'm going to start with Joyce Mosley, because her family was involved with some of this.
Yeah.
Not this particular story, but with like
similar story. We had out of that 198 acres that was given to the family, we set aside land for a respectful, decent burial ground. And that land now is under a paved road. They enlarged the road and didn't dig up the bodies in the 1960s. So my suggestion to her was it may be a story that your local PBS station would be interested in airing. It may be you want to submit to a local paper. If you have like a neighborhood kind of online network, it may be something to begin sharing there, but figure out how you can get your story out, because that's going to be the most important thing.
Okay. Let's go to does anybody have another comment? If not, I'll go.
I was just going to add, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Holly.
No, I was just thinking from like a PR kind of perspective is if they could do some type of event, you know, where you write up a media advisory and invite the local media, invite, you know, some bloggers or researchers in your area, and see if you can put together some type of event where they can go and take pictures and document it and be your own media. And hopefully the other media will show up as well.
And to add to that, I would say find the local genealogy group. And if there's not one there, start one, see if there's an OGS group there, which is Afro-American Historical Genealogical Society. But don't forget the Historical Society, because they could have even more information and might love the opportunity to partner with you. And don't forget the local librarian. And this could be the beginnings of being able to tell that story. Start booking your own, like Holly's saying, start booking your own, tell the story, share the story, and invite the media. And you got social media as another platform.
Right.
Do Facebook Live, just do it and
That's right.
start putting it out there.
Yeah. Do a program at the churches for February for Black History Month.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. With regard to the enslaver being the father of an enslaved Negro woman, what are some of the ways we can confirm or prove relationships? Side note, the ancestor is listed in the will and probable record, I don't know if they mean probate record, and allotted land on the enslaver's property. You need me to read that again? With regard to the enslaver being the father of an enslaved Negro woman, what are some of the ways we can confirm or prove relationships? The ancestor is listed in the will and probate record and allotted land on the enslaver's property.
I'd say a will and DNA. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Shelley, you started.
A will, DNA, but they're going to have to track that enslaver's family. You can't do African-American research during any slave era time without doing both. You have to do the enslaver, and you got to search that community to find other information, because it might not be there with the father, the enslaved father. It might be with the neighbor or the cousin down the street that has something written in, that community about that couple, or knowing that those kids were the master's kids or whatever you want to call it. So learning about that community besides that family.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, this is Bianca. I just wanted to say my grandmother, who was my conduit for joining the Cane River DAR chapter, there were no records of her birth at all in the state of Louisiana. And so I contacted my chapter regent, and we discovered her, she was born by way of a midwife, right? And so that was at the local church parish. And that's where we got a certificate of birth. And so I had to send that back to, I believe it's Baton Rouge or New Orleans, I can't remember which office, so that now my grandmother can be listed as having been born in Louisiana. So Shelley's right. You can also look at old newspapers. I know that the Library of Congress has some of my Kuti relatives listed in databases. So you just search everywhere, uncover everything. And yes, you do need to look at those white ancestors first. They're the ones that own the records. They documented the bill of sales. And remember, human beings who were considered slaves were considered property. So they're listed with animals sometimes, so everything, look at everything.
And obituaries.
You can also look at an obituary.
You both said it.
They are great source of information, because they're going to say whose sister, brother, cousin, uncle, aunt they were. So track those down. And some of them actually are still, you can find them at a local funeral home or a church.
Okay.
And then the Bible, sometimes.
Family Bible.
Yeah. Those are considered
repository.
Legal documents for verification. So
All right. Have you used DNA match results to connect with white descendants of the white ancestor in your lineage? Who has used DNA match results? The three of you. So you want to is there anything you want to add to that besides yes or no?
Yes, I can quickly say this. On 23andMe, last week, I think it was on Tuesday, I connected with my grandmother's eldest brother, Ernest Kuti's granddaughter, and she passes for white. She identifies as white. Last week through 23andMe. I also took Ancestry as well.
So one of my relatives, a distant cousin, we had a DNA match, we connected. He actually was helpful in me getting past a roadblock I had on my Campbell side, and he had all the information that traced back to Scotland. So it was amazing. I was glad that I connected with him.
Okay. What surprised you most about the findings in your research?
I can tell you that I have like over, I don't know, it was like 3.4% Native American heritage. So I know I have Cattle Nation heritage. That works great for my federal job working for the Department of Interior because I get extra points, right? And so I have cattle heritage and a little bit of Chitimacha heritage, which is in Jeanerette, Louisiana. The Cattle Nation headquarters is in Binger, Oklahoma. So I have to have a certificate of Indian blood. And that's very rare. If you've looked at any of Dr. Gates's Finding Your Roots episodes, many African Americans can't necessarily prove it because they can't find those documents, but it is documented because I believe it was one of the Rachels, Jean-Baptiste, I believe, Rachel, who married Anne of the Cadeaux. The other thing that I wanted to mention that I forgot to say is that my Gallian Creole relatives on my grandmother's great-grandfather's side, I'm actually a descendant of the daughters of the king, Les Filles de Ra, up in Quebec. So I connected with them on Facebook. So start connecting with organizations, start looking at names, look at the Soundex records when you go to like local historical societies as well.
Michelle, what surprised you the most?
That, my 33rd great-grandfather is King Henry I of England. That George Washington is my second cousin, 9 times removed. And there are cities that are named after family members in the state of Texas. We are very instrumental in the development of Texas and unfortunately taking land from Mexico to create the state of Texas. And there are erected waymarks and signage throughout Macon, Georgia area, as well as Texas, calling out my family and all their accomplishments. So that was pretty amazing.
Joyce?
You might be eligible for, I think it's Daughters of Texas. I think they have their own.
Yeah, it's the Star of Texas or something like that. Yeah, they told me, and they said that is like, so I learned a lot about just that whole Campbell name. They said, if you ever use that name down in the state of Texas, they're going to roll out the red carpet for you. There's a lot of history that we have, some, like I said, unfortunate, taking property and land and whatnot, but we definitely have a name down there.
Joyce, what surprised you the most?
How far back I was able to go with our history. Humphrey Moray came to this country in 1614, but I was able to track his family back 5 generations in Europe. So that was interesting to me to be able to do that. And then also the fact that I have as much Native American DNA as I have. So, and that was the Lenape, the Delaware Indians. So 2 things that surprised me.
Holly?
Well, speaking of DNA, my Irish Rileys came up 15% from Ireland. So that was good. I was glad to see that, how it reshuffles, that I did get some of that. But speaking of the Rileys, Thomas Jefferson Riley, who was the father of Preston Riley, he was the wealthiest man in Butler, Taylor County, Georgia. And Sally, his black, the one that he had Preston with, she was actually, I think, his 3rd cousin. So Thomas Jefferson Riley was related to his white wife, and then he was also related to Black Sally, Mammy Sally as well. And Mammy Sally was also a descendant of my DAR patriot, Jacob Riley.
Shelley?
I think the biggest thing for me was when I actually got my DNA back and saw how much European that I had. Even though I knew there was, European in there, my mom's father is white. And, but it was just my mouth didn't close for a while. It's like, no, wait a minute. I know my black ancestors, this, that, and the other. So it was getting over that shock. I'm good at tracing. I can go to the England, go to the Scotland and all the way through. But I will say, because apparently I have tapped into family that have a lot of genealogists in it. So a lot of DNA online, a lot of trees already done. You know, one of the lines, go to Charlemagne, you know, like 55th grade, whatever. But again, I set my course of where I'm trying to get. And then coming back to Joyce or Holly, whoever said it about what I leave behind is what's more important for me, because I can take that European line. You know, right now, 1405, William Worden was born in Lancashire, you know, England. But it's about what I leave behind and what I can get them to keep going with. I don't have any grandchildren, so I got all my nieces and first cousins and all of those folks to leave stuff behind. So yeah, that was my shock, was how deep the European was, or how much it was.
Have you done any research, any of you, on the Africans in your ancestry, and has any of it taken you to their origins? Has anyone found the origins of your African ancestors?
One.
Shelley, really?
One. I've got John Goins, Gowan, 1619, one of the 20 odd. But just a couple of weeks ago,
Where was he from, Shelley?
Angola, I'm sorry. One of the 20 odd Africans that came in 1619.
Mhm.
But the biggest one is I got my first 100% Nigerian DNA match. And he's living in New Jersey, engineer, but from Nigeria, and all the family still over there.
Very
So
cool.
that's the new mission for 2021. Is it possible to track back? You know, because that's the only line I know besides my Goins line coming in is Nigeria, because that's just the highest on my DNA. So I'm excited about that.
Okay. Next is, does anyone have literature recommendations to get started learning our heritage?
I'd like to know what specific heritage this person
Right.
is talking about.
Yeah.
Because you start with a surname, right? I can tell you that there have been several authors that have wrote about the Albertville Cane River community. There's a lot of research. People have written books. Elizabeth Shone Mills. I'm related to Gary B. Mills, who's a Rachel, and the Rachels are my grandmother's cousins. They are both Caucasian Americans. And so her and her late husband wrote the books, The Forgotten People, about my large Creole heritage.
Right. So you're saying like there might be books specifically about your family lineage out there, but are there any other general books about learning about your lineage that any of the ladies here can suggest?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would look to the Historic Society in your state. A lot of that information, or the Religious Society. I found a lot of information from early Philadelphia and the development of the Black churches and the information that was saved from there. And then the historic societies, and of course the DAR.
I was going to say the DAR library in DC.
In
Yeah,
DC.
I spent time in the Macon genealogy archive, which is in the library in Macon, Georgia, and learned a ton of information about my family. You know, they were very prominent in that city, so in Middle Georgia in as a whole. So I was able to extract a lot of information, make photocopies and whatnot, just based on walking in and saying, what do you guys have on the Hart family? And they came out with about this big and about this thick of everything about the family.
My early family is Quakers. There were Quakers on both sides, and the Quakers document everything. So if you've got any Quaker people in your in your family, that's a great place to go. And most of it's online.
Thank you.
Oh, the other thing too is that you can also reach out to a professional genealogist and pay the money to do that. I am going to be doing that for the lady that's on the line. I believe her name is Bianca Alexander. That is my mother. And I don't know anything about her mother's family, and I'm ready to start that Richmond, Virginia, Halifax County, North Carolina side very soon. So I'm going to get a professional genealogist for that.
Well, before you do that, connect with me, because I've got 4 folks that are doing that I'm researching from my UVA project. Their
Okay.
folks are in Halifax. One of them is in the chat room right now, and I am 45 minutes from the Library of Virginia, and I am in Fluvanna County, and the research all the Central Virginia counties around Charlottesville. So check with me, and maybe you don't have to be paying any money for that professional person, because you might have family connections.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and the question was, will this recorded session be made available on the Daughter Dialogues website? Yes, and it will be sent out to the newsletter subscribers, which everyone on this chat or call or meeting will be receiving an email with the link. Do any of you all collaborate with the local libraries to share your personal stories? Is anyone doing that specifically?
I am. I wrote a children's book, so I try to work within the libraries in my locale about the children's book grants gift, and to be able to do story hours, or right now I'm doing some Zoom calls with kids that sign up at the library.
Thank
I donated a copy of my book, Riley Road, to the DAR library. But before I wrote the book, I hired the genealogist there at the DAR Research Center to help me, and he ended up finding my research that I had already found online. So, it confirmed that what I was doing, I was on the right track. So,
Good.
so that was kind of funny. But yeah.
Okay. We have to the panelists with the ancestor who has left a 99-year lease on land. What happens when the lease is over? Does the family have to purchase the land or get a renewed lease to keep the family's land?
Well, when that lease was over, people were free. So it just stayed in the family. He actually became, and his name is James Roper. And actually, you can visit the website called nicholasroper.com, and you can go look at that emancipation paper and look at the story, and even a picture of Mr. James Roper. But he eventually became the largest landowner, like his father, in Jefferson County. And if you're not familiar with Jefferson County, Virginia, now West Virginia, think about John Brown, Harper's Ferry. That's Jefferson County.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And today, the Roper family, as in people of color, are still the largest landowner.
So this one is, I guess 2 people submitted a similar question. One was in advance and the other one is here live. Basically, how can the DAR help promote or help women of color to find out if they have a patriot and become a member? Do you have any recommendations? And the other person wrote a similar question, because it is very difficult for African-American women to document their lineage. As long as the DAR requires documented lineage, it seems likely that the DAR will remain an overwhelmingly white organization. Would you like to see change in the DAR policies for membership? And if so, what changes would you like to see? So in combination, it seems like they're asking, it's pretty difficult for African-American women to document their lineage. Would you like to see some type of DAR help or campaign or a change in their policy? What would you like to see done to help more Black members to be able to join the DAR, first become interested in DAR, and second, to be able to join the DAR?
So one of the things that I saw was that DNA was going to become more important. And actually, when I joined, now it's almost 11 years ago, that was not a form of criteria, but I believe, and I don't have all the details on whether it's passed or it's approved, but I had heard that DNA was going to be a measure in addition to help with connecting the dots on patriot lineage.
There's also the book, The Forgotten Patriots. I mean, that's a good place to start to see if your ancestor is a part of that book, and begin there.
In reference to the Forgotten Patriot book, just realize that was done also in 2008.
Yeah.
And just know that there's much more out there now. in 2020 than it was when they put that book together. So there are African American and American Indian patriots that are not in that book, and they're finding more now. And so, yeah, I would just keep going at it. Use that as the guide and keep going. But locally, talk to the local historians in the historical society, because you never know who wrote the book. Like Joyce said, she wrote about her story, put it in the library, but you need to find out what the local resources are first and just inundate you on that community. I think it's critical.
I'm going to press you all a little bit more and have you think more about answering the question of, do you think the DAR should change any of their policies to accommodate bringing in more African American women?
I don't even think it's about changing policy. I just think it's us women of color having conversations with our close girlfriends, our sisters, our aunts, cousins, people we work with, people in our social organizations. The policies are consistent. They're the same. We go through the same process of getting vetted out and verifying documents, just like our Caucasian counterparts and the others. So I don't think there's a change in policy for me, because it is a legacy organization. It's just connecting with people who are interested in genealogy, who have a heart and compassion to help you get going. And it's being a part of these type of forums that get the ball rolling. So connecting is the best way to get started for me.
Anyone else?
And wasn't it a Black woman that was trying to join the DAR that set the precedent of the application process that we use now of documenting each generation with birth, death, marriage records? I mean, so we've helped set some of the precedent for the application, but as Bianca was saying, and Michelle, having these conversations, can we use the DNA? They've added the Y DNA, the autosomal DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, but it's still a little tricky, right? If you're still trying to find the common ancestor with the DNA and you don't know, you're on one side of the bridge and you're trying to get to the other side of the bridge, it's hard to connect. And I think we just have to keep working at it, as much as we are able to, talking with other people, sharing the information, and coming together. For some people, the road is quick and easy. Like Shelley said, some of the information was already readily available, the family trees. I may never know. I was trying to get into the DAR on my maternal line, and I actually got in on my paternal line. So I would love for my mother to be able to be a daughter. But if I, Virginia, early Virginia, as a Black person, or Native American history, pre-Civil War, I mean, this early 1800s, it gets a little dicey trying to get those documents that may or may not exist. They could be in somebody's family Bible that's sitting in the attic, or if you have a family Bible and you don't want it, or there's no one else in your family that wants it, please donate it to a library. Please donate some of these documents or obituaries, the family reunion programs, digitize. A lot of the information is not online. As much information is available online, there's so much more that could be online.
I think it's important not necessarily like Bianca was saying about the policies. I'm not looking to change policy. I just want them to do what their application says. They already got the rules out. I don't remember, and I'm a membership chair for my chapter, so I work with the prospective members on their applications, white and whoever. And I think about, I don't remember answering a race color on the application, just like on the pension records for the patriots or your soldiers. It doesn't identify them as a colored soldier and things like that. So just walk the talk and be honest, because it's really not about the race. You made it about race. We're not making it about race. We're trying to honor our legacy, what our ancestor contributed to, this, that, and other. It's our country, So I think if they just stand by what they have for tenets, and we help each other to get in, and I think there's more of an issue that I don't think I can get there. And again, 7 days a week, I'm doing research on slave era. You can do it. If there's a paper trail, we can help try to find that. You know, so I think the working together and everybody's comment is really the great goal here is let's take a look. Let's see if they're there.
And instead of changing policies, how about we start talking about the benefits of joining DAR scholarships?
Absolutely.
Come on now, let's think about that. We have some successful Black women.
Yeah.
So let's train that next generation. Let's start talking to them about joining the CAR. We should start having those conversations to hook them in, because I got a daddy and I also had a sister. My sister joined because I said, let's honor my grandmother's legacy because she died last January. But she was like, well, what's in it for me? Like, why are you doing that? Like, you know, you Black. I said, yeah, I know I'm Black, but why are you joining DAR?
It's a great resume item too to have DAR on there,
Yeah.
because sisters are going to look for sisters, just like a fraternity and a sorority. That, you know what I'm saying? You're going to look for people that believe and take stances just like you.
And trust me, and being in corporate America, it was always a shock when I told people that I was part of the DAR. It's like, you're part of what? What did you say? You know, so, you know, and it's a blessing that, you know, we have probably 7 African Americans that are part of the DAR, African American women, in my family alone,
Awesome.
including my grandmother, who is 100 years old. Probably one of the
joined.
oldest. Yeah, she just joined. She just joined in August, and so could be potentially the oldest living African American DAR member.
Yep.
So it's never too late, is what I'm saying. You know,
my mom just joined too at 90.
Yeah.
So
Go.
it's never too late. Yes.
Yep.
All right, the next question. If I wanted to trace the ancestry of someone unrelated to me from maybe 50 years ago, what would be the first step? Would it be a DNA test, or should I head to the library first?
Head to the library first.
Oh, wait, we might have a different answer.
Wait, say that again.
It's for the person or for the person's helping someone?
I'll try it again. If I wanted to trace the ancestry of someone unrelated to me from maybe 50 years ago, what would be the first step? Would it be a DNA test, or should I head to the library first?
Are they alive?
This is what I have. So
Is she in the
question? Go ahead and add on to your question.
If they're unrelated, then the DNA is not going to help at all.
Right, that'd be a direct descendant.
Historical Society libraries.
That's where I would go.
And unless you're trying to help someone, I don't know, unrelated, meaning like, you know, a friend of mine wants to get started. How do they get started? I love the Ancestry DNA. It's probably one of the largest databases where people have contributed. I take that information, put it in GEDmatch, and then it kind of cross-checks all the different types of, you know, like family tree DNA and whatnot. So I would say you will probably get a laundry list of relatives that you may have never known about just from your DNA alone. So if they just want to get started, take the test, take the DNA test and see what you come up with.
I go the complete opposite.
But if you don't want to spend the money, you can do like I did in Cleveland, go to the Historical Society. That's one way to get started. Start looking up information about maybe possible relatives that left the South and went up during that first wave of the migration to the northern cities. You can do that. I did GEDmatch, GED GEDmatch as well. They give you the email addresses of people and you can reach out to them that way as well. So thank you, sister, for sharing that. I appreciate that because I forgot.
I was just going to add on, my suggestion would be you can kind of look at it from 2 ways. You can start with yourself and just go up as far as you can, your parents, their parents, and so on until you stop. And then you can go from the top end of the person that you're researching. And sometimes I use a theory like, well, maybe his parents or grandparents were so-and-so. And then I flesh that out to see if it works out. And then I work my way down and then I try to meet in the middle. So just by putting down on paper who you have, making a timeline, does the timeline make sense for, you know, relationships and marriages and living in a certain city? You know, a name, a place, and a date will get you pretty far with each person, and then just kind of go from there.
Okay.
One last thing I just want to say is, because this was helpful and I think they're doing a better job, ancestry.com. You could just, like you said, Holly, just start putting in who you know, your parents, your grandparents, and then these hints come up. And
Yes.
then you'll see that maybe other people are doing the same thing. They're researching the same tree, the same line, and you connect with them, and then it starts growing from there. And then, I mean,
Right.
so there's
Take
other
advantage
people
of the
probably-
free trial.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's probably people out there that's already looking at your family tree in
Mhm.
some capacity, and you just don't know it.
And if you don't do Ancestry, don't forget FamilySearch.org. So
Yes.
start with what you know. Before you go to DNA, you got to do that genealogy first.
The
You
paperwork.
got to do the basics, going to back to what Holly is saying. If you're going to get started, that person from 50 years ago that you're not related to, you're going to have to gather as much information that that person knows about their family, and then go start building a tree, building a timeline, and things like that. But I think DNA is, if they don't get those basics down, the DNA is not going to help them, because you got to be ready for that DNA to come.
Yeah.
Because as all of us know, DNA comes back and sometimes would tell you something that you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'll leave it right there.
There's a question directed specifically for Joyce. Are you related to the writer Walter Mosley?
I am.
Do you want to
Yay.
elaborate how you're related?
I'm not sure how many generations back. It's 3 or 4, but yes. I don't know him actually, but I know from my research that we're related.
Perfect. I have someone that says, I am new to this dialogue and it is my first time hearing about this. What is the first place to start to find out your heritage in this organization? I have already taken 2 DNA tests. So I think this is specific to joining the Daughters of the American Revolution. Where would you start to find out if you have a patriot? And she's already taken 2 DNA tests.
Well, I can tell you for myself, I started in Illinois where I lived, and I found a local chapter, and I talked to my regent and my registrar, and we got going from there. So I think working with them to help you, I can say that mine were very instrumental, to the point where they got on a plane and flew to Washington, D.C. and sat down and showed them and walked through my application, because they said it was the most difficult one they've ever done. So yeah, just but those 2 people were so instrumental in helping me. So if you can find a local chapter, say, hey, you know, I'm interested, there may be some connection, can you help me? And
Bunny Bowen added to this answer. She put a comment in there and said, start with, who's an attendee. She says one option is to do a 5 generational chart. Start with yourself or do 2. Start with each of your parents and work with a local chapter, as Michelle is saying.
And to find if you don't know, maybe the local chapter doesn't have a website, or maybe they're not online, just go to dar.org and click join, and the information will go to the national people, and they'll connect you with the local people. So some of the work is done for you in terms of, who's closest, what chapter is closest to you. And then they will assign you the chapter's registrar, and then you just work from there. And before I reached out, I was trying to gather all my information, so I had kind of, foundation to work with to give to them. Like, here's my theory. I think this is the person. Because my patriot was a new patriot. He wasn't in the DAR database. So I had a lot, my application was 38 pages long. So I had collected a lot of information and given it to the registrar, and she gave me some information back. Okay, research this. Does this match? It's the same person, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes it's helpful, like we said, start with the basics, write it down, start building a tree, reach out to dar.org and click join, and then they'll connect you with someone and then start the process.
If you're coming to Central Virginia, it's me.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if it's Charlottesville, Albemarle, Fluvanna, Louisa, Nelson, Orange, any of those Central Virginia counties, I'm with Jack Jewett. Yeah.
Okay, Shari asked the question. Shari, hey, you're here online. Will contact information be available if we want to follow up with a particular panelist? My answer would be email me, which is, you have 2 ways, either through contact@daughterdialogues.com, which is where you got your email invitation from, contact@daughterdialogues.com, or through the Daughter Dialogues website. There's a contact form. It comes directly to me. It's just me, and I will send it right on to them as fan mail, which I have done plenty of times before, and that'll be the easiest way. Joyce, where can we buy a copy of Graham's Gift and other books to donate to local classrooms?
Amazon's one place. Bookshop, which is the best place because they deal with small bookstores, minority-owned bookstores. So it's I think it's bookshop.com. If not, it's org. But two places. Or you can email me. I have books.
So send me the email and I'll forward it to Joyce. Any interesting encounters with white DAR relatives? So you joined the DAR, you found out that, hey, we descend from the same patriot. You're white, I'm not. Any interesting encounters?
Just an embracing, you know,
Wait,
I
so
went
you did meet
I went to,
somebody that's a DAR member?
yes,
How did you know that you both were connected through the same
um,
patriot or related?
I'm trying to remember how we found out. She probably remembers, but I met her definitely at Continental Congress, and she was high ranking. I think she was her region.
And
For
Continental
her.
Congress is the annual national convention. So
That's
that
right.
once a year, about 3,000 women that belong to the DAR descend on Washington, D.C. in DAR's Constitution Hall for their annual conference. So go ahead.
Yeah, so we face-to-face met there. I believe how I may have originally gotten connected with her is through the member I was telling you about in the family who did the trace back to England. That you know, oh, we got somebody else in the family that's part of the DAR, and it's like, oh, okay, so got a chance to meet her. We still talk today. We're Facebook friends, and she's amazing.
Anybody else had a connection?
Yeah, the regent of the chapter, she's passed away, but a few years ago, her name was Sharon Boyer. And again, this is Jack Jewett in Charlottesville. And my patriot is John Boyer. So her husband's line and I are connected. And it was like, really embraced totally. No, just great conversation. Sharon, he was coming off of another line, but it was wonderful. Yeah.
Which testing service has the best resources for genetic DNA research?
Ooh, that's a
DNA, I'd say 23andMe gets more scientific I think that's out of Mountain View, CA. Ladies, you have to hook me up on that. I think that one was out of Mountain View, but that one is more scientific. I'm just saying that because I can't think of a better word. But if you want to look at census records and you want to kind of make those connections, I prefer Ancestry for that. But I do feel like 23andMe has been more precise with like second and third generation contacts for me.
I'd
I've done
agree
both
with
of
that.
them.
I
And
do both.
yeah.
And I did family tree DNA too.
Yep, I've got that one too. And living DNA. I will tell you, living DNA came on the market about 3-4 years ago. And living DNA, that database is building. It's not as big as Ancestry, and they're the biggest, right? And they're like probably, I think, at 20 million right now. But living DNA gave me down to my African tribes. I was really impressed. And their twist on it is location more than just the race. They took me and said Yoruba, Akan, and Mandinka. Boom, right there. And I was shocked, and I was like, okay, I could do this. But that's what they were selling, that they do the measurement a little deeper and they go for location, and it's not current location. It's back then.
One of my genealogist friends always, her suggestion when I was first starting out is, what question are you trying, what question are you trying to ask? What information are you trying to find out? So ask the question. So if it's related to your paternal line, then you need to have your dad or your brother or your uncle or your grandfather or whomever take the Y DNA test. Are you trying to find some information on your maternal line? Okay, well, then you need to take the mitochondrial, the mtDNA test. You know, if you just want to find out how many cousins you have, then take the autosomal test, which is the least expensive, which is what Ancestry focuses on, and then go see what information, you know, pops up, matches. And once you have your raw DNA, you can upload it to gedmatch.com, and then that opens up a whole pool. So it's like you're fishing in a different pond. So you might reel something in on Ancestry, and you might reel something in on Family Tree DNA or 23andMe or GEDmatch. And I wanted to find out if I had some Jewish ancestry. So I went to DNA Consultants, and it showed, you know, the different Jewish DNA markers. So what are you trying to find out? Start with that question, and then that will help direct you. And then it's kind of addictive, really, because I've tested with probably 4 or 5 companies, and I ask for testing kits for other people for Mother's Day or Christmas, and so I'm always doing these little scientific kind of science experiments. So
And
it
some
can be
of
really
those
fun.
companies, you can upload your other company's data to them.
That's true.
And if you're
Right.
leery about GEDmatch and you can look at My Heritage. You can upload your DNA
That's right.
from another company to My Heritage and Living DNA, and I think Family Tree DNA let you do it too. I just can't remember because I tested with them also.
Okay,
Mhm.
we have time for about 3 more questions. Are any of the panelists on the African American Task Force for DAR?
I consulted with them. I'm not on the task force, but I was asked. I consulted with them.
Anyone else?
No.
Okay. Even
Yeah.
though I live in Minnesota, but my ancestor lives in Arkansas, should I join the Arkansas DAR chapter? I'm gonna take a stab at
Well,
that.
you can be a member of,
Right,
you
because
can be a member of one chapter.
we have a couple of
Of another.
people on the panel, Michelle and Bianca, who live in different cities, than in which chapter that they different states.
Me
and
too.
in the chapter they belong. Holly, you left us. Holly used to be in
No,
my chapter in Maryland.
I am still an associate member, Risha.
Okay, but that's not your true membership. So that's the point, though.
Oh.
So you can belong to 2 chapters, actually. You can join one chapter as your primary chapter. You can join the second as a secondary chapter called an associate membership.
Yeah.
And some women that you see here, Bianca and Michelle, choose to join where their ancestors had their roots, and some choose to join where they live because they want to be active with that chapter. But again, you can do both. Like Holly she belongs to a chapter here, secondary now. She was primary in Maryland, and she moved and joined the chapter there too. So she has 2 memberships. So I hope that closes that question. Last 2 questions. Do any of the panelists have a presentation suitable for presentation at a locally organized history and genealogy conference?
I
Is that
do.
on DAR, or are they talking about genealogy?
Do you have presentations that you can present at a history and genealogy
Absolutely.
conference?
Yeah,
Yes.
always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing one on the 9th. Yes.
And the last one is for Bianca. How do you feel about AfricanAncestry.com? I did my DNA with them.
I have not done that yet, but I do plan on doing that specifically to research that other side of my father's parentage, because he did not know his biological father growing up. But I also want to research that so I can gain more insight on my mother's heritage from Virginia and North Carolina. So the answer is no, I haven't done that yet, but I want to.
Okay, it seems like we have answered all of the questions asked here live, as well as submitted in advance. If you put your question in the chat, we didn't get it. You had to use the Q&A question because we weren't necessarily monitoring the chat. So hopefully you did put it there and you got your question answered. And please remember that the same time next week, Thursday next week on January 14th, we will be doing Dialogue with the Daughters with a different group of daughters. So be sure to come back and join us there. And remember that the first day of Daughter Dialogues, the podcast will be returning the first Thursday in February in commemoration of Black History Month. In the meantime, thank you all for this wonderful first ever Dialogue with the Daughters Live. And thank you to the panelists for all that you have done and shared with us. And the panelists, do you have any other closing thoughts before we sign off?
I recommended a couple books in the chat for getting started, and that was Kenyatta Berry and Brian Sheffy's books that are out. There was a question earlier about getting started on genealogy. Those are two I would recommend.
Perfect. And again, next week's Dialogue with the Daughters Lives the discussion will be about Patriots of Color. And that will be featuring Alelia Bundles, who you may have known if you've listened to the podcast. She's the great-great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, America's very first self-made millionaire. And the Netflix series was modeled after the biography that she wrote. Diamond Bush, Stephanie Miller, and Joyce will be back with us again, Joyce Mosley, next week. So until then, thank you, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Risha.
Bye, everybody.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.